I am the very last one left alive, and I have buried every brother that I ever knew. My own brother James lost his head to a sword in the bright streets of Jerusalem. Peter was hung upside down in Rome. Paul fell under the axe of that same emperor. Andrew, Philip, Thomas, and Matthew, every one of them is gone into the dark now. And here I sit, an old man in Ephesus, with these hands that once mended the nets. These very same hands once held the head of God himself against my beating chest. They all call me the beloved disciple now, but once I was called something darker. Boanerges, son of thunder, the young man who wanted to call fire down from heaven. That same young man who begged for the seat of honor at his right hand. Above all, he looked at the two of us and laughed without laughing. He saw what I would become. Now my voice has gone thin, and my old hands shake when I try to hold them still. They carry me in to speak. I open my mouth, and only one sentence ever comes out.
Behind the gospel of light and the visions of fire lies the longest survival in the apostolic story. A young hothead who watched everything end, who outlived everyone and turned thunder into love. This is not the story of how an apostle died, but how the only one who did not die kept the memory. In this episode, we walk with John, son of Zebedee, across 70 years of silence and slow survival. The slow weight of being the last witness alive.
The fishing boats of Bethsaida came home before dawn, with nets dripping, and the smell of the Sea of Galilee thick on the wooden hulls. Zebedee, son of a fishing family with hired servants and an established trade, was a man of standing in the small port. His sons, James and John, worked beside him in the boats, learning to read the water, the wind, and the silver flash of fish in the deep. The family of Zebedee was not poor. Their nets were good, their boats were sound, and Salome, the mother of the boys, had means of her own. She would later be counted among the women who supported the ministry of the rabbi from Nazareth out of their own resources. John grew up watching strong men work in the dark hours, listening to his father bark orders over the wind, sleeping with the smell of fish and salt baked into his skin. He was not delicate. He was not soft. He was a fisherman's son raised on hard labor, sudden storms, and the cold theology of the synagogue of Capernaum, where every Sabbath the same scrolls were unrolled and the same hope was repeated. The God of Israel would send a deliverer. Until then, the family went out at night and came back at dawn, and life kept its rhythm. Then came the wilderness preacher, John, the son of Zebedee, was young when he left Galilee and went south to the Jordan, where a strange figure dressed in camel hair was crying out for Israel to turn around. The young fisherman attached himself to the Baptist as a disciple. He listened, he fasted, he waded into the river to be immersed in the cold water. He was already searching for something larger than nets and fish when the Baptist pointed one day at a quiet carpenter from Nazareth and said, "Behold the Lamb of God." The young John followed his teacher's gesture and walked after that quiet man until he turned around and asked, "What do you seek?" They spent the rest of that day with him. The hour was the 10th hour. The time when the sun begins to lean toward the western hills and the rest of the young fisherman's life began. He returned to Galilee changed. When the rabbi from Nazareth came north and called him and his brother out of the boats, the call did not come to a stranger. It came to a man who had already met him at the river and already knew his voice. He left the nets in the boat and the boat on the shore, and his father standing in the surf with the hired servants. He did not look back. The young man who walked away from his father's boats was not yet gentle. He was not yet patient. He was not yet the apostle of love. He was hungry, intense, ambitious, with a temper that ran close to the surface and a tongue that could cut. The rabbi saw all of it and gave him a name. Boanerges, son of thunder, the man who carried storms inside his chest. The Aramaic word landed like a stone in the boy's heart, and from that day the name attached itself to him and to his brother. They were the Thunder Brothers. They were the ones who would startle the others with sudden flashes of zeal and sudden flashes of pride. The first storm broke in a Samaritan village. The rabbi had set his face toward Jerusalem, and the road went through Samaria, and a certain village refused to receive him because his face was set toward the holy city of the Jews. When the news came back to the small band of disciples, John was the first to react. He and James stepped forward and asked the rabbi if they should call down fire from heaven to consume the village. The fishermen had no fire, they had no power, they had only the memory of Elijah, who had once burned the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel and called down fire from heaven on a captain of 50. The Thunder Brothers wanted to be the new Elijah. They wanted to settle the insult in a single flash of judgment. The rabbi turned and rebuked them. They did not understand what spirit they were of. He had not come to destroy lives. He had come to save them. The village was spared. The lesson sank slowly. The young John would carry that rebuke into his old age, and decades later, when he wrote about the rabbi, the gospel he produced would have not a single curse against any village or any people. The second storm came over rank and reward. The rabbi had been speaking about his coming kingdom, and the disciples had been arguing among themselves about who would be greatest. James and John saw the moment and slipped away with their mother Salome and approached the rabbi privately. They asked for the 2 seats of honor in his kingdom, the seat at his right hand and the seat at his left hand. They wanted glory. They wanted to be the closest to him when his throne was finally set up. The rabbi looked at them with that same quiet, devastating gaze, and I asked them if they were able to drink the cup that he was about to drink, and to be immersed with the immersion he was about to be immersed with. The brothers, blind to what they were saying, answered yes. They thought he was speaking of conquest. He was speaking of crucifixion. He told them they would indeed drink his cup. James would taste it within 15 years, when the sword of Herod Agrippa took his head in Jerusalem and made him the first of the 12 to die. John would taste it differently, slower, longer, in exile and in survival. The third storm came over exclusivity. The disciples had seen a stranger driving out demons in the name of the rabbi, and they had told the stranger to stop because he was not one of them. John reported this to the rabbi, expecting approval. The rabbi answered, "Do not forbid him, Whoever is not against us is for us. The young fisherman was learning slowly that the circle his rabbi was drawing did not match the circle he wanted to draw. The circle was wider. The kingdom was stranger. Inside this rough, ambitious young man, the rabbi was working. The Thunder brothers were drawn closer to the inner circle. With Simon Peter, the two became the three who were taken into the chamber when the daughter of Jairus was raised. The three who climbed the high mountain and saw the carpenter of Nazareth shining like the sun with Moses and Elijah on either side. The three who were called deeper into the olive garden on the night the soldiers came. John was not chosen because he was sweet. He was not chosen because he was the gentle one. He was chosen because the rabbi saw what was buried under the thunder, the capacity for a depth of love that none of the others would equal. The fire that wanted to burn Samaritan villages was the same fire that refined would write the words, "God is love." He was the youngest in the band. The rest were older men with families, weathered faces, sons of their own. John was a boy compared to them, perhaps 17, perhaps younger when he started, perhaps not even 20 when the rabbi was arrested. His youth gave him a different access. The older men kept a careful, masculine distance from the rabbi. The youngest, with the unguarded affection of someone still being formed, did not. At the meals, he sat close. At the teachings, he listened with the open hunger of a son. The rabbi treated him with a tenderness that did not soften his demands. When the rabbi spoke of denying the self and taking up the cross, John heard it with the rest. When the rabbi pronounced woes on Pharisees and merchants and priests, John heard it with the rest. But he was being shaped for something none of the others were being shaped for. He was being prepared to stand under the cross and to watch. The thunder did not die in him quickly. It did not die in him all at once. It died slowly over years, scene by scene, as the rabbi turned a hot-tempered fisherman into a man whose hand would shake from old age, while writing about light and shadow, about life and death, about love that does not perform and does not boast and does not envy. The boy who wanted to burn down a Samaritan village would be the same man who decades later would refuse to step into a bathhouse in Ephesus because the heretic Cerinthus was inside, fearing that the building might collapse on a man who denied that the rabbi had come in real flesh. The fire never left. It was simply redirected. The young John burned for revenge. The old John burned for truth. And between those two fires there was a single supper, a single cross, and a single empty tomb. The upper room in Jerusalem had been prepared in secret. A man carrying a water jar had been the sign, an unusual sight in a city where women carried water and men carried other burdens. The disciples had followed him to a house, and the master of the house had shown them a large furnished room on the upper floor. The lamps were lit. The low couches were arranged around the U-shaped table. The cups of wine were poured. The bread was laid out. And there, in that room, on the night before the rabbi was arrested, John took the place that would define the rest of his life. He reclined to the right of the rabbi with his head close enough that when he leaned back, he leaned directly against the chest of his teacher. The Greek word for that position is anakamenos en kolpo, lying back in the bosom, the place of honor and intimacy at a Greco-Roman style meal. The young fisherman was tucked into the heart of the supper. The meal began strangely. The rabbi rose from the couch, removed his outer garment, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and began to wash the feet of his disciples one by one. The work of the lowest servant in the house, the work that not even a Jewish slave was required to perform. John watched the calloused hands of the carpenter scrub the dust from the feet of fishermen and tax collectors and zealots. When Peter resisted, the rabbi explained that without this washing, he would have no part with him. Peter then demanded to be washed completely. The rabbi smiled and finished his work. He returned to the couch beside John. He put his outer garment back on. He spoke quietly, "One of you will betray me." The room went still. The disciples began to ask, one after another, "Surely not I." Lord Peter, who was across the table on the other side, gestured to John to ask the rabbi who it was. John, with his head close to the rabbi's chest, simply turned his face and asked in a low voice, "Lord, who is it?" The rabbi answered him with the dipped morsel and gave it to the man named Judas, who took it and went out into the night. The door closed. The lamps flickered, and the supper kept going. That meal stretched into a long, slow farewell. The rabbi spoke about the way and the truth and the life. He spoke about the vine and the branches. He spoke about a comforter who would come. He prayed a long, aching prayer for his disciples and for the ones who would believe through their word. John drank in every sentence. The Greek of his later gospel would carry the rhythm of that night for the rest of his life. Sentences that loop and return on themselves, words that mean themselves and their opposite at once. Light and darkness, life and death, love and hate. The vocabulary of a man who once leaned on the chest of God and heard the heartbeat under the skin. They went out to the Garden of Olives on the slope across the Kidron. The rabbi took Peter, James, and John deeper than the others. He asked them to watch with him. John watched the rabbi sweat what looked like blood under the gnarled olive trees, watched him fall on his face and beg the Father for another way. The young fisherman could not stay awake. 3 times the rabbi came back to find them sleeping. 3 times he woke them. The 4th time the soldiers came with torches and clubs and the kiss of Judas. The disciples scattered. The thunder son ran with the rest, but he did not run far. While the others fled across the valley, John doubled back. He had connections in the city. He was known to the household of the high priest, perhaps because his family had supplied fish to the priestly courts, perhaps for reasons no one ever recorded. He slipped through the gate of the high priest's courtyard. He brought Peter in. Behind him, he stood in the shadows and watched the interrogation. He saw the kicks. He heard the spit. He watched his rabbi answer with the slow dignity of a man who already knew the verdict. When the rabbi was led from one court to another, from Annas to Caiaphas to Pilate to Herod, and back to Pilate, the young fisherman followed at a distance with his face covered by his cloak, weaving through the Passover crowds, refusing to look away. Then came Golgotha, the hill of the skull. just outside the city wall where the Roman occupation made its public examples. The road from the Praetorium ran past the bakers and the spice merchants, past the gates of the city, past the rubbish heaps. The cross was already in place. The nails came out of a leather bag. The hammer hit the wood and the rabbi's wrists and the rabbi's ankles. The cross was lifted into the socket of stone with a heavy thud. And there, at the foot of that wooden post, John stood. He was not at a safe distance. He was close enough to hear the breathing, close enough to see the eyes, close enough to be recognized. The other 11 had vanished. Peter was weeping somewhere in the city after his denials. James had run with the rest. Andrew, Philip, Thomas, the others, all gone into hiding. Only the young thunder son had come back. He stood with the women, with Mary, the mother of the rabbi, with Mary of Magdala, with his own mother, Salome, with another Mary, the wife of Clopas. 4 women and 1 young man. The rabbi looked down through the blood from his thorn-pressed forehead. His eyes found John. His eyes found his mother. He said 2 short sentences, drawing on the last of his breath. Woman, behold your son, and to John, behold your mother. With those 2 sentences from Nazareth gave his mother and his closest disciple to each other. The Greek says that from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home, his taught idea, into his own place, into his own life, into his own care. The rabbi was making sure his mother would not be left alone after he was gone. He chose the youngest disciple, the one with a soft enough heart to receive a mother who was not his own. The thunder son became a son. The orphan who was about to be made by the cross would be the same orphan who would take her in. The rabbi died around the 9th hour. John watched it. He saw the head fall forward. He saw the spear go into the side, and the strange flow of blood and water that he would write about decades later, still unable to forget the exact mixture. He watched Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus take the body down. He helped wrap it. He walked with the women to the new tomb in the garden. He went home with Mary, the mother. He did not sleep that Sabbath. He stared at the wall. He had stood there. He was the only one of the 12 who had stood there. The weight of that fact would never leave him. On the first day of the week, in the gray of the morning, Mary of Magdala came running to the house. She told them the stone had been rolled away. John and Peter ran for the tomb. John, younger and faster, arrived. First, he stopped at the entrance. He looked in and saw the linen wrappings folded carefully, the cloth that had covered the face rolled up by itself in a place by itself. Peter arrived, breathing hard, and went straight in. Then John went in. He saw, and he believed. He did not yet understand the scripture that the rabbi must rise from the dead. But standing in the empty tomb, with the morning light coming in through the rolled back stone, he believed. The young thunder son was the first of the male disciples to believe. He believed without seeing the risen rabbi. The seeing would come later, in the locked upper room when the doors were shut, for fear of the Jewish authorities, and the rabbi suddenly stood among them and showed his hands and his side. It would come again by the Sea of Tiberias. When 7 of the disciples had gone back to fishing, and a figure on the shore called out for them to cast the net on the right side of the boat, they cast, the net came up full. John squinted toward the figure on the shore. He turned to Peter beside him and said the most John sentence any disciple would ever speak. "It is the Lord." Just that. No proof, no argument, just recognition. Peter threw himself into the water and swam. John stayed in the boat and rowed in with the catch. That, too, would be a pattern. Peter would always rush. John would always watch and wait and arrive. The thunder of his youth had been refined into a quieter recognition. He had stood at the cross. He had run to the tomb. He had taken the mother home. He had recognized the voice on the shore. The man who had once wanted to call fire down on a village had become the man who could spot the risen carpenter through morning mist on the water. The fire had not gone out. The fire had become eyes that would not stop seeing. After the ascension, the early years in Jerusalem were a blur of new wine and new persecution. John stood beside Peter at the gate of the temple when the lame man leaped to his feet. He stood beside Peter before the council of priests and answered with the boldness of men who had nothing left to lose. He was beaten with Peter and released with Peter, and he kept going. When Philip went down to Samaria and the gospel began to break out of Jewish soil, Peter and John were sent down together to lay hands on the new believers. The young thunder son, who had once wanted to burn a Samaritan village, now walked among Samaritans, laying his hands on their heads. The fire he had wanted to call down on them had become the fire he was now invoking over them. He could feel the irony in his own bones. Then the deaths began. James, his older brother, the other thunder son, was the first to taste the cup the rabbi had promised. King Herod Agrippa, eager to please the Jewish authorities, seized James and put him to the sword. The blade fell in Jerusalem around the year 44. John buried his own brother. The other son of Zebedee was gone, dead in the first major wave of state persecution against the followers of the Nazarene. The first of the 12 had drunk the cup, the mother of James and John, Salome. The woman who had asked for both her sons to sit beside the rabbi was forced to watch one of her sons die for that very kingdom and the other son left behind to carry it. The years stretched on. The community in Jerusalem fractured under famine and pressure. Stephen had been stoned. Saul of Tarsus, after his collision with light on the road to Damascus, had become Paul, and the gospel was bursting out through Antioch and Asia Minor and Greece. James the Just, the brother of the rabbi, became the pillar of the Jerusalem church. John remained part of the council. Paul mentions him alongside Peter and James the Just as one of the three pillars who gave Paul and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship and sent them to the Gentiles. John was no longer the boy with thunder in his name. He was an elder, a reference point, the witness who had stood at the cross, and the witnesses kept falling. James the Just was thrown from the pinnacle of the temple and finished off with a club around the year 62. Peter and Paul went to their deaths in the persecution under Nero around 64 to 67. Peter crucified upside down in the Vatican Circus. Paul beheaded outside the city. Andrew on a cross in Achaia, Philip in Hierapolis, Bartholomew flayed and crucified in Armenia, Thomas lanced in India, Matthew killed in Ethiopia. Tradition handed down the stories one by one, and the only thing they had in common was that you kept hearing them and kept burying their memory. He was outliving the entire band. Jerusalem itself fell next. In the year 70, the legions of Titus crushed the Jewish revolt, surrounded the holy city, broke through the walls, and burned the temple to the ground. The smoke could be seen for miles. The holy place where the rabbi had stood and taught and called. The temple, his father's house, was now a ruin of cracked stones. The world of John's youth ended in that fire. The fishing nets of Bethsaida, the streets of Capernaum, the synagogues of Galilee, the long road south to Jerusalem, all of it was gone or scattered or under Roman boots. John had moved by then. Tradition places him in Ephesus, the great port city of Asia Minor, where he had brought Mary, the mother of the rabbi, and where he had become the elder of a community of believers. Mary had died somewhere along that road. Some say in Jerusalem, some say in Ephesus. The young thunder's son had kept his promise. He had taken her into his own. He had cared for her until the end. When she went, he was no longer the keeper of her body, only the keeper of her memory. The carpenter who had given her to him at the cross had bound him into a service that lasted decades. The work of being a son to a mother who was not his own, the work of being the only one in the room who remembered her son the way she did. The Emperor Domitian came to power in 81. By the early 90s, the demand for emperor worship had grown sharp. The aging apostle in Ephesus refused. The believers refused. The persecution found him. Tradition tells that they took him to Rome and tried to boil him in oil. He stepped out of the cauldron unharmed. Tradition tells that they tried to poison his cup. He drank it and lived. The stories may be legend, may be embroidered, but underneath them runs a quiet fact. They could not kill him. He had drunk a cup deeper than poison decades earlier in an upper room and had survived. The Roman authorities, unable to martyr him, exiled him instead. They sent him to a small rocky island in the Aegean Sea called Patmos, a place of stone and goats and wind, far from any city where troublesome men were sent to grow old in silence. He grew old there, but not in silence. On the day called the Lord's Day, alone on that rocky island, the old apostle entered a state that was neither sleep nor waking. He heard a voice behind him like a trumpet. He turned and saw the risen rabbi standing among 7 golden lampstands, with hair white as wool, with eyes like flame, with a sword from his mouth and feet like burnished bronze. The old fisherman fell at his feet as one dead. The risen rabbi laid his right hand on him and said, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore." What followed was a series of visions stretching over weeks or months, dictated to his disciple, Prochorus, recording images that have haunted the imagination of every century since. Lamb on a throne, 4 horsemen, 7 seals, a great prostitute on a scarlet beast, a city of pure gold, a river of life, a bride descending from heaven. The old man wrote down what he saw with the urgency of a witness who knew his time was short. He sent the visions in 7 letters to 7 churches in Asia Minor, including his own at Ephesus. He named names, he warned, he praised, he rebuked. He told them what he had seen on the island. When Domitian was assassinated in 96 and the new emperor Nerva released political exiles, John returned to Ephesus. He was now somewhere past 80 years old, perhaps closer to 90, the last man alive who had walked with the rabbi. The community in Ephesus had grown. The believers there knew they were sitting at the feet of a relic, not in any contemptuous sense, but in the literal sense that the body of this old man had touched the body of God. His hands had held the loaves the rabbi had multiplied. His ears had heard the rabbi's voice. His chest had received the weight of the rabbi's head in the Garden of Olives. He was the last living connector between the time of the carpenter and the world that had now spread to every corner of the empire. In those final years, he wrote his gospel, late, slow, spiraled, deep. He wrote his 3 letters, short and warm, returning again and again to the same theme, beloved, let us love one another. He spoke against teachers in Ephesus who said the rabbi had only seemed to have a body. He insisted, with the tactile insistence of an old man who had touched real skin, that what had been from the beginning was that which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled. He was a witness with his hands. He had handled it. He would not let anyone tell him otherwise. A story circulated in Ephesus. The old apostle would entrust a promising young man to one of the bishops in a city he visited with the instruction to raise him in the faith. He returned years later and asked the bishop for the young man. The bishop hung his head and said the young man had become a bandit chief in the mountains. The old apostle demanded a horse and rode into the mountains to find him. The bandits captured him. He asked for their leader. When the young man saw him, he tried to run. The old apostle, in his 70s or 80s, ran after him, calling out, "My son, why do you flee from your father?" He embraced the bandit. He wept on him. He led him back. He restored him. The story may be polished, may be sharpened in the retelling, but it carried a truth that the church of Ephesus knew. The old man would not give up on anyone. His sermons grew shorter. His memory grew narrower. They carried him into the meetings on a chair when his legs no longer held him. The community waited for the master to speak. He would open his mouth and only one sentence would come out. Little children, love one another. They asked him for more. He gave them no more. When they pressed him, he answered that this was the commandment of the Lord, and if it alone were done, it would be enough. He was distilling 70 years of memory into 8 words. The thunder son who had wanted to burn villages was finishing his life on a single sentence about love. He buried his disciples too. Polycarp of Smyrna and Ignatius of Antioch had sat at his feet as young men. They would carry his words into the next generation. They would die for those words. But John, the last of the 12, would not face their fate. The cup he had been promised was a different cup. He would die in his bed in Ephesus, an old man surrounded by his community somewhere around the year 100. When Trajan was emperor and the 2nd century was just beginning, he had outlived every other apostle. He had outlived the persecutions of Nero, of Domitian, of the early Trajan years. he had outlived Jerusalem itself. He had become a bridge from the time of fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee to the time of organized bishoprics and Greek-speaking churches in major cities. When he died, an entire world died with him. He was the door closing on the apostolic age. The old fisherman closed his eyes in Ephesus, and the last set of hands that had touched the body of God went still. No one alive could say I was there anymore. The witnesses were finished. What remained was his short, stubborn sentence: love one another. The Thunder Son had nothing else to leave them. To explore the raw, unvarnished psychology of biblical history, subscribe